maximize every opportunity so that you can become legendary.
What adjustments can you make right now to make yourself 1%
Your
better?
only goal is to be the best version of you.
Welcome to Becoming Legendary. It's Patrick this week. I'm doing a solo cast, and I am doing a solo cast because I want the freedom to talk about some things that I find incredibly important, and I don't want to have any convolution of ideas, and I want to be able to speak freely. So no co-host this week. We'll be back to regularly scheduled program on the 10th, the 20th, and the 1st. But for this first, we are going to do a one-on-one cast. And I'm going to talk about some things that I think are incredibly important and that are incredibly pertinent. Challenges facing our society, our planet, our global community, and the likes. Now, I want to start by saying, neither of my co-hosts were made aware that I was going to put out this podcast, and I'll apologize to them for that. And everything that I say in this podcast will be 100% exclusively my own opinion. So this week, I'm going to talk about, again, things that I think are really important: the loss of intellectual honesty, the loss of shared reality, as well as this really pressing idea of how we communicate over an ever-expanding divide, and how we start to bridge these two realities, or multiple realities, that are being built out away from the shared reality that does exist. But before I get into those subjects, I want to offer a little bit of information about myself. So, and why I may have an opportunity to view the things that are going on, and many things that go on, in a little bit of a different perspective than you. And I've talked pretty extensively on the podcast about how my brain operates just a little bit differently than normal brains. And in many circumstances, I think that can be disadvantageous for me. And in many circumstances, I think it can be advantageous. So I don't think that it's better or worse. Maybe if I had to like pick one, I think I would probably likely say that it's a little bit worse. But I'm certainly not saying my brain operates better than yours. I'm just saying it likely operates different. And to kind of explain how that really happens, or why my brain might operate a little bit differently, I'm going to take it back to a conversation I had this week with a really, really important friend in my life, guy that I grew up with, who literally from like age 7, I was connected with. And we were kind of talking about the founding principles that the conversation we were having just led to this idea of the founding principles that made us who we are. And the thing that he really identified in me from 7 years old, made me who I am, is that I never really cared about what other people thought of me. And that, I've known that pretty intently and pretty internally for the majority of my life. I'm not influenced by the opinions of others, and I'm not shifted or swayed by that standardized peer pressure. And why that is, I don't exactly know. And in saying that, it's also that, it's not that I don't care what people think about me, right? I mean, my preference is that everyone thinks that I am kind and do the right thing and try really hard to be a good human, because I do those things. But if somebody doesn't think that I do that, that's also not going to crush or impact the opinion that I have of myself. And I think it's easy to kind of say that your brain operates that way. But I think my brain really does operate that way, in that I just, I make decisions that I am accountable for. And when I make those decisions, or when I make an interaction happen, I will represent myself in the best way I possibly can. And when I leave that interaction, I will know that I showed up in the best way that I possibly could. Sometimes that's not great. Sometimes it's mostly not perfect, but it is me. And I won't think about, oh, this person probably didn't like that. I may think, I could have done a better job representing myself. I could have been more impactful. I could have been more calm. I could have been more active. I could have been more energized, but I could have been more social. But I will know that I showed up in the best way that I possibly could in that moment. And to kind of demonstrate a little bit of the rarity of this, there's this, I think it's a 1951 study. It was done by a guy named Solomon Asch, and it was a conformity study. He took subjects and he put them in a classroom full of people. Everyone in the classroom or room was in on the study except one participant. And the group was basically asked a series of things where they were provided with information that was obviously wrong. The participant, the one participant, was the only one who who really had the option of answering either way. All of the other members of the room had to agree with the fact that the statement that was made that was obviously wrong. And that was part of the study, to see how people would conform if they were in a room full of people that all said something that was clearly wrong was right. Well, 75% of the participants at one point during the study agreed that a statement that was obviously wrong was right, because the rest of the people in the room said that a statement that was obviously wrong was right. Now, in the control group, 1%. So 75% to 1%. So there's a pretty significant impact in how most people are influenced by the people around them, by the peers around them. And again, the fact that I'm not influenced by the peers around me is not necessarily an advantageous thing, right? Being the only one to do something, it much more often than not ostracizes you. So there's definitely some negativity to having a brain that operates the way my brain operates. But my friend kind of reminding me of this thing being a part of me when I was 7 really sets in that this isn't something that's new. This isn't something that really I created. This is just something that arose in me and who has kind of made me the person I am. So why am I talking about this? Why does it matter that I have a brain that isn't likely influenced by peer pressure? And I will say this, it's important. It's a part of the defining characteristics in me, because I do have this really spooky ability to predict things in the future. And it's not a supernatural skill. There is nothing supernatural about it. What it is the clarity that I have around things is not clouded by the opinions of others. So when I see something, I see a thing for what it is, and the voices speaking on the outside of what it actually is are not impacting me. And as an example of this, I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast or not, but I've talked about this a lot. I started telling people that there was a global pandemic coming 4 months before anyone knew what COVID was. And there was people always ask me, what was your source of that? And my source of that was I got in I-10 traffic one day, and I got on the highway. And my life in Phoenix did not involve driving in rush hour traffic. But for this occasion, I was meeting somebody in Tempe. I had to get from Chandler to Tempe. Maybe it wasn't I-10, maybe it's the 101 or 202. I think it's the 101. Whatever it was a highway in Phoenix, somewhere between Tempe and Chandler. And I got on, and I only had to go like 2 or 3 exits. But in that 2 or 3 exits, I looked around and I saw people in their cars who were sicker than I'd ever seen people. And I saw people, I could see through the windows of these cars, people experiencing stomach discomfort. I could see through the windows of these cars, people coughing and sneezing and looking like they wanted to die. And I didn't see 1, I didn't see 2, I didn't see 3. I saw 5 to 10 of these people in a 3 exit span. And I went home that night and I said, there's a global pandemic coming. And that was when COVID's here. So no one has, like, they haven't got there yet. First, it wasn't here before March, then it wasn't here before February, then it wasn't here before January, then it wasn't here before December. I'm telling you, it was here, it was happening, it was in Phoenix in November of 2020, which is when I identified it and when I said, hey, when I went home and said, hey, this is coming. And then by the time COVID got here, I had already said in my mind, this is a thing that's going to happen. I'm 4 months ahead of what everybody else is experiencing. And you know, the news in March is like, oh, you know, all these horrible things are happening. But I'd already had 4 months of thinking about what those things were going to be like. So when somebody came in and they were really scared, I had already gone through the process of identifying what that experience was like and what it was going to be. And these are not the, like, again, people, when I have this conversation with them, they always ask, you know, what outside sources did you have? And there are none. I only observed what I observed, and I used the data of what I observed to make a prediction about the future. And that prediction is all it is. It is just a prediction. It is not a certainty. There is no clairvoyance in this. There is just clarity of fact and how those facts will play out in the future. So that is just it's a very small kind of example of things I can see. Now, I will tell you right now, there's another thing that's going to happen. You know, there was this condo that just caved in upon itself in Miami. And the initial report came out and it was like, oh, you know, the engineers of this condo, they did a terrible job. Maybe they did, I don't know. I do know that I have never in 40 years heard about a high-rise condominium caving in upon itself. Now, I am not about to tell you about some 9/11 conspiracy theory. I am going to tell you what is going to happen with condos along beach shore property. They are going to start caving in on themselves over the next 10 years. It's not because of any conspiracy. It is because global warming is raising the ocean levels. And as the ocean levels rise, moisture that was never expected, never planned for, is going to seep into soil structure. And it's not going to matter whether you have rooted the base foundation of your high-rise condominium into the bedrock, because one, we don't know how the bedrock is going to shift as sea levels rise. But also what we're going to find out is that moisture interacts with the iron construction of buildings that we've had. And as that moisture continues to increase, the structures of our building degrade. Our buildings degrade. And this is going to be a thing that we are going to deal with. And I don't know how many high-rise condominiums are going to have to collapse in on each other before there is a conversation around, oh, maybe this does have to do with the fact that our climate is changing. But I will make this prediction that we will, in the next 5, 10, 15 years, start to experience this in a way where we can't just write it off as, oh, there was one bad construction group that happened to come over from Cuba and they're a very easy scapegoat to blame for this thing that has never happened before. So I've wanted to say this on the podcast for a while. I've never really had that opportunity, but I will tell you, we're going to experience more of this. And like, I want to say these things because I think that they do offer credibility. I've never heard anyone ever say anything about that. but it's what happened. And it's going to continue to happen. And as the facts start to come out more and more and more, they'll continue to align with these things. And as more and more of these catastrophes happen, we're going to have to reframe the way we think about building things next to an ocean that is expanding to consume the land that we have decided is ours. So I just checked, and there have been 4 building collapses in seaside communities worldwide already in 2021. I get it. You're thinking, okay, great, Patrick, why are you talking about any of this? Why should I care about you talking about yourself? And the reality is you don't need to care about me talking about myself. I'm only saying these things because I want to lay some groundwork for the important things that we're going to talk about. So let's just jump right into intellectual honesty. And I'm going to read a definition off of Wikipedia for intellectual honesty. That is, intellectual honesty is an applied method of problem solving characterized by an unbiased, honest attitude, which can be demonstrated in a number of different ways. One's personal beliefs or politics do not interfere with the pursuit of the truth. Relevant facts and information are not purposely omitted, even when such things may contradict one's hypothesis. Facts are presented in an unbiased manner and not twisted to give misleading impressions or to support one view over another. References or early work are acknowledged where possible, and plagiarism is avoided. Okay, so why do I say there's a lack of intellectual honesty? So I think I'm going to start here with kind of a common thing that we're all growing more and more accustomed to when we are engaging in a disagreement with someone, and that is goalpost moving. So I just a real quick framework. It's like goalpost moving. I say to you, hey, listener, I just want you to know that your bones are made of rocks, or your bones are rocks. And you kind of retort back, Patrick, I think you may have kind of misunderstood what bones are. In many ways, they're similar to rocks, right? They're made of minerals. They're hard. They're like kind of prevalent in our world, although less prevalent than rocks, certainly. But really, they're a completely different structure that is completely differently categorized. And although they may have some similar mineral interaction, they're 2 different things. We define them completely differently. And then instead of continuing that or acknowledging that, I switch the conversation, and I'm like, well, bones are really important to the body, right? And you were kind of left baffled because I had come to you with this idea that bones are rocks, and you told me I was wrong. And instead of like even acknowledging, engaging in the fact that I may have offered you some misguided information, I just switched to a completely different topic. So let me give you kind of a more real life relevant example of the goalposts being moved. So before the 2020 election, or shortly after the election was certified, there were a bunch of people running around saying that COVID was a hoax, and that as soon as the new president was sworn in, and specifically that COVID was a hoax in order to ensure that Donald Trump wasn't reelected as president. And then as soon as a new president was sworn in, COVID was going to miraculously disappear, and everything was just going to be like we just imagined the whole thing, and everything would reopen, and no one would ever mention the word COVID again. And there were lots of people running around saying that. Well, now those same people are running around and they're saying, COVID is the thing that's propping up the current administration. That this thing that was so detrimental to the previous administration's efforts is now the thing that is ensuring this current president has control over things. there's no logical path to ensure that the exact same public health crisis was detrimental to one presidency inherently, not because of policy decisions, but because inherently it was a thing. And then that there was going to be this miraculous erasing of this public health crisis when a new president was elected. And then when that doesn't happen, you move the thing and say, well, now this is a benefit for the new president. That is a real life example of goalpost moving. I have never heard anyone who was running around saying that this was going to disappear ever come out and say, oh, I was wrong about that. But I have heard them come up with a new story. Maybe you've experienced something like that, maybe you haven't, but I think that is a very real life relevant example of goalpost moving that you may be familiar with. And that goalpost moving within discussion is something that is becoming more and more prevalent as people, as the gap between our ideologies gets wider. This seems to just be commonplace. So that's one way in which we are lacking intellectual honesty. Another thing that that is happening is we're seeing one perspective. So I want to kind of run through a personal experience again here. I had sat with a person who was highly academically regarded and was working with the UN on human rights. And she was working from a perspective that all human beings are born equally. And now this is a sensitive topic, right? It's all human beings are not born equally. That is a reality. Each of us, when we are born into different places in society, different places in the world, and with different skill sets and talents that are inherent within our genetic makeup. And then on top of that genetic makeup, the environment in which we are born into also shapes and shifts who we are, what we become. And the reality is there are two inputs that create a fully formed functioning human. There is biology and there is environment, nature versus nurture, right? But there is no nature versus nurture debate. Nature versus nurture is a complete fallacy of logic. It is impossible for anything to exist. So nature is biology. It is the being that we are, the physical thing. And nurture is the environment in which we are born into. So nurture would include the air that we breathe. Nurture would include the nourishment that we receive, the water that we drink, as well as the love and attention of the things around us. But you cannot possibly exist without biology, and you cannot possibly exist without environment. So there is no possibility for a nature versus nurture debate. There is only these two things interacting. And that's a very important thing. And every one of us has likely heard the nature versus nurture thing. And that has been drilled into us. And we have taken positions on that, or it's possible we've taken positions on that. But the reality is we've taken positions we've taken a position that cannot possibly exist. So if you are arguing that nature is the thing that shapes someone, or if you are arguing that nurturing is the thing that shapes someone, you're wrong. Both things shape people. This became important because if you start to say that all humans are born exactly identically, you are starting your foundation of saving humans, of protecting human rights from a place of dishonesty, from a place of non-reality, from a logical fallacy, from an idea that cannot exist. And if you're starting in a place that cannot exist, the likelihood that you get to a place that can exist is pretty small. So what this really boiled down to is this person had had been taught a perspective that males and females are exactly identical. and that because we put males in blue clothes and females in pink clothes, they end up different. And biologically, it's just wrong. We can observe actionable differences in species that are not human, that have no human nurturing capacity. And in every species that has a sexual reproductive capacity, there are variances in male and female actions, and humans are included in that. Now, there is a spectrum that each of us exists upon, how masculine or how feminine we may be. And for some of us, we may shift more towards the feminine side, and for some of us, we may shift more towards the masculine side. But to pretend that there is no species difference between males and females is completely wrong. And so I asked her how she'd come to that conclusion. And her response was she had never been exposed to any biology. A person with a PhD, working with the UN on human rights, who has consciously chosen to ignore 50% of the equation. In understanding the solution she is so desperately working to create. Now, that is a huge glaring hole in intellectual honesty, right? You cannot possibly ignore 50% of an equation and come up with the right outcome. And as a more simple, I get that there's some charged energy around that subject. And I could explain all of this, but it's too much. The reality is there is variance that is genetically in our male-female makeup that comes from the preciousness of the female sex cell and the inherent non-preciousness of the male sex cell. A female human will have somewhere between 300 and 400 viable sex cells in her life. A male human will have billions of male sex cells available at any time. And the fact that we have that offers competing reproductive strategies, and those competing reproductive strategies are evolutionarily built into the beings that we are and that have evolved over billions of years. So this should be inherent in the dialogue, but in case it's not, I just want to very clearly articulate that because there is variance between males and females, it does not mean that a male is better than a female or a female is better than a male. It just means that we have differences. And that these genetic differences have been bred into us through the genetic encoding of the evolution of our species into the beings we are today through the course of our ancestral history, actions, and decision making. And the reality is that everyone that is born has variance between everyone else that is born. We all have our own genetic gifts, genetic challenges. We all have our own opportunities that we're born into, opportunities that we're not born into, the place and time and families that we're born into will all impact our lives, and they will mean that we end up not being equal beings. But the fact that we are not equal does not mean that we are not treated equal. We are not all the same thing, but we all should be treated as if we are equals. Right? We do not need to be the exact same to be treated equally. That also doesn't mean that our end outcomes should be equal, right? Like there is going to be a variance in the way that lives play out, and each of us will have our lives play out in different ways based upon the choices we make. And as an example of that, right? I spoke with a few people about my desire to make this podcast, and every single one of them said, don't do it. Right? So it's a choice I made to make this podcast. Like there are controversial quote unquote controversial topics in here. I don't find these topics remarkably controversial. I find the misinformation around them as clouding the reality. So what I am working on here is unpacking a lot of things that people are generally fairly scared to speak on or about, because I think they are vitally important. And if we are scared to talk about the things that are vitally important, the opportunity for progression is pretty minimalized and small. So again, while there are differences in gender genetics, it does not make one gender better or worse than another. It just means there are differences. So I just want to be very clear about that. If you're really interested in deepening your understanding of evolutionary biology, I would start by reading Robert Wright's The Moral Animal, Why We Are the Way We Are. That's a pretty decent look at the physiology and functionality of the human brain and male and female species differences and why they exist and why they are written into our evolutionary history. There are absolutely errors and omissions in Robert Wright's book, and finding an error or omission in a book does not make the rest of the book invalid. So this is another thing that's kind of been going on a lot, right? Is there's this new idea that if the media tells us something that isn't true one day, that everything the media says therefore has to be fake or false. And that's just simply not true, right? If I came to you tomorrow, if I came to you today and I said, hey, listener, I just want you to know I've solved something, I've figured something out. 2 plus 2 equals 5. And you look at me and you're confused and you say, why? And I say, well, 2 plus 2, it's 5, okay? I just want you to know that, just write that down. You know that forever now, it's all good. And then I come to you the next day and I say, hey, 3 plus 27 equals 30. Well, the fact that I had told you the day before that 2 plus 2 equals 5 does not make my next day statement of 27 plus 3 equaling 30 false. It means that I was wrong or lying or providing misinformation the day before. But being wrong, lying, or providing misinformation in one circumstance does not make all future instances in which I speak wrong. It should make you more aware of what I say. If I say something that is factually inaccurate, you should heighten your scrutiny around the things I say. What you should not do is immediately assume that everything I say is incorrect, false, or dishonest, because that's just inherently not true. And saying that, it lacks intellectual honesty, but also lacks just intellectual observation, right? It's just making a judgment about all future outcomes based on something that happened is deductive and wrong. So I think to kind of circle back on why this concept of intellectual honesty is really important. I want to put one more example out there. Let's say you and I are sitting face to face, and in between us is a playing card, and on your side of the playing card is it's solid red, and on my side of the playing card it's solid green. And someone comes into the room and they ask us, listener, what are you looking at? And you say, well, I'm looking at a solid red card, or I'm looking at a red card, or I'm looking at a card that's red. And then that same person asks me, what are you looking at? And I say, I'm looking at a green card. I'm looking at a card that's green. And then you and I now have completely different opinions of the same object that sits in front of us. And we have different opinions because we have a completely different perspective of that card. And from your perspective, what you see is a red card. And from my perspective, what I see is a green card. Now, the lack of intellectual honesty would be if you got to see my side too, like, right? If it flipped really quick, or someone who was holding the card just kind of tilted it for 1 second, you got a little flash of green. And you didn't change your perspective at all. You just said it's a red card, right? That you have new information now. Or what if you got to see 10% of my card, or you got to see 1% of my side of the card, or I got to see 1% of your side of the card? Wouldn't I have to change my opinion? And if you aren't able to change your opinion, then you're lacking intellectual honesty. This also flips us right into the concept of shared reality, right? Because shared reality is a really important concept in that we all do have our own individual perspectives of every single thing that happens. And there's this new idea that has been pushed in communities that I'm very close to, that everyone has their truth, and that we need to respect people's truths. And I've been fighting against this idea for a very long time, because I view it as one of the most problematic concepts that exists in society. And here's the reason, right? So if you and I sit down in a room, and you have a red card facing you, and I have the other side of that same card, which is green, facing me, and an independent observer comes in, and they can see both sides, and then another independent observer comes in and they can't see anything. They're just blocked off from the room. And I start saying, it's a green card. Well, then this independent observer who can't see anything starts saying, yep, it's a green card, because I spoke first, right? I was the first one to say something. And then when you say, no, it's a red card, the independent observer who can't see a single thing says, no, it's obviously a green card. Like, Patrick is telling the truth. He sees a green card. He's telling you it's a green card. You're wrong. But you're looking at a red card. So now we are at odds, right? Now there's another person in the room who has the perspective of both sides. And they say, hey, you know what, Patrick, listener, it is both a red and green card. I hate to tell you, but you only had a 50% view of this card, or a little bit less than 50%, right? Because there's also the sides of the card. But this independent observer has a perspective of a shared reality, has more of a scope, has this independent observer, right, which cannot exist within our world other than the entity itself, right? So if there was no actual independent observer, if the only other thing in the room was the card, the only thing that would know the truth about what we were looking at is the card itself, because the card itself is both a red and green card. Now, I understand that there is a physics lesson that could be offered here, and that the card is neither red or green. It is a reflection of light, and it is actually neither red or green, because it is not that red and green are the colors that the card is not absorbing, and that is why we are seeing them. I understand that is the concept that we could go to. We're not going there. What we are talking about is the shared way in which we interact with the world. So getting into a physics argument is not beneficial here. It is not what we're going for. What we are looking for is an understanding of the universe with we interact with, not the universe that is underlying, that is hidden, that is interacting with us. So, and this is, but why this is because why we aren't worried about the physics here is because this is a social experiment, right? This is a social problem, and this is a human social experiment or experience. So if the card itself is the only thing that knows what the truth is, then the person who gets the closest to the card, right? So if you and I are looking at opposite sides of the card, but I get a 1% view of your side of the card somehow, some way, I expand my perspective 1%. Well, then I know an awful lot more about that card than you do. Just 1% more offers me an entirely new perspective that there may be more than just green on this card. There may, like, I saw a sliver of red, and therefore I can no longer intellectually honestly make the statement that I am looking at a green card. I could make a statement that could be wrong, that is wrong, that says I'm looking at a mostly green card, because the card itself knows that it is not mostly green. It is neither mostly green nor mostly red, because there is a small fraction of card that is something else. It is less than 50% red. It is less than 50% green. And it is an entity outside of my individual perspective and outside of your individual perspective. And if we reward people who say the card is green or say the card is red, and we reward them for speaking their truth, for holding their truth, we are rewarding people for being wrong about the card. We are rewarding people for having the wrong idea of the shared reality of the card, of the space of information that is between each of us. And if instead we shifted our reward, if instead of saying, you get your own individual truth, we said, oh, you should expand your perspective so that you can see the 1% of the other side as well, we end up in a place where we understand each other significantly more. And it only took 1%, right? If I could see 1% of your red and you could see 1% of my green, you and I would understand each other much better than if we only had that red line, green line that we couldn't look beyond. So we culturally have started to reward people. We have started to grant people this right to make up their own reality and hold that as the most valuable thing. And that is wrong, and that is detrimental, and that is rapidly expanding the divide between us in a way that at some point will no longer be repairable. So the reason I'm here, right, in my own hubris, is I want to see what I can do to shrink that gap, to start to build communication over the divide, and to pull people back closer to this shared reality that exists independently of our own individual perspectives. Our own individual truths are not held accountable by what exists, by what is. And so this all goes back to this concept of why I may have a little bit of granted clarity, right? It is that my perspective, while it is mine, and I only have the perspective of me, it is not clouded by the ideas that can cloud other people's perspectives. So I can go into a concept and I can quickly absorb that information. And if that information is new and valid, I will readily adapt it. So this has happened in my life, 8 years ago, and it sounds so silly now because you can look like in every grocery store, every magazine, every shopping aisle, there is a keto thing. But when I started talking about keto 8-9 years ago, and I started telling people, you can eat fat and you will lose more weight than you can possibly imagine, people thought I was a lunatic. And I understand why people thought I was a lunatic, because we had all been told this story that fat was the thing that made people fat. And then I come with this new concept, right? I really took in the early teachings of a guy named Dave Asprey, who most people don't know his name, but he's the guy who popularized bulletproof coffee. He's really the guy that brought the concept of healthy fat, a reality of healthy fat, to America for the first time in a popularized way. And I took kind of his guidance and ran with that down an intellectual exploration that led me to the concept that, keto is a fantastic way to recreate a human body, to lose weight, to use energy pathways that most of us are no longer using, that are built evolutionary into our biology, and that can have really significant benefits for you. And it's hard because 8 years ago when I said these things to people, they thought I was crazy. And now it's like the most common thing. Like everybody has tried a keto diet. Now keto diets are very hard. They require immaculate discipline, and there's not the leeway that you might have in a normal diet. And that's why when testing keto on larger populations, it was never as successful as I wanted it. Because what I learned over the course of many different body composition challenges that we did in Vitality is everything that we did always worked. But the things that people were most interested in is how they could cheat, right? What is the way to get around the system? What is the way that I can create body composition change without actually doing the work? And that's not everybody, right? But that was the most common thing. It's like, oh, can I bend the rule this way? It's like, well, you could do whatever you want most of the time, but with keto, you can't really bend the rules. The rules are, you get too much carbohydrate in your body, you create too much glucose, your body shifts away from ketones and starts using glucose, and then you're in a completely different energetic system. So what I found over the course of many different body composition challenges is creating a plan of mindfulness and the widest variance of flexibility within your eating actually created the biggest change. The best body composition program that I ever did, results-wise, was 30 days of meditation along with eating essentially real food. And the changes were dramatic. Every single program we did, there was always a significant body composition change in the participants. But that one was the best. And it didn't involve, there was zero, and I do mean zero. There was zero ask for physical exercise. And there was zero ask for essentially, I mean, there was no ask for calorie restriction. None of the programs ever did add calorie restriction. But they were all very different, and they all had amazing results, but flexibility was very key. But my point is, and the way I was able to do these different things, right? I could have stuck with the first one, right? First one, we did a slow carb plan, and slow carb was a thing that Tim Ferriss kind of created. And I had my own variants to slow carb, but we kind of used that programming method. And slow carb created body change. And it had cheat days, and people kind of really enjoyed that. But the longer term reality was that the cheat days became the thing that people mostly fell into after the 30 days. And that just wasn't a sustainable long-term plan. But it worked for the 30 days, right? I could have kept going back to that program, but then I realized, okay, here's a thing that worked. But what could we do to shift? So then we kind of went more to a ketogenic plan. And ketogenic plan worked, and it was great, and it created significant body change, and really rapid body change. But again, when you get 3 weeks into ketosis and the food starts to get boring, people get bored with that, and then they start to cheat. And that last week, right? The last week, for most people, it was a net failure. So people were only able to go about 21 days, right? And then net failure kind of happened. And that wasn't for everybody, but it definitely was for a lot of people. And they took in that information. Again, it worked. And I took in the information of the 2 previous programs, and it was like, well, shoot, man. Like, I don't want people to drop out after 21 days, and I don't want people to only be able to do this for 30 days. I want to create plans where people can do this forever. I want to create a mindful pattern of consumption that allows you to be a better human and to adapt and adjust your body in the ways that you want it to. And so what does that have to do with intellectual honesty? Well, what I'm saying is, I take in new information very quickly, and I can adjust my thinking to adapt to new information. I don't have to say, oh, this slower carb method program worked, so I'm just going to hammer that forever. Like, if I can make something better, I will shift my opinion based upon facts and information that come in. And shifting opinion based on facts and information is the thing that's getting away from us right now. I want to roll right into kind of a primary topic here, which is masks and vaccinations. And I want to roll back to the start of the pandemic in March of 2020, or the start of the announced pandemic, right? I told you where the pandemic started, but the March kind of shut down, right? When our world really changed in a way that we in our lifetime hadn't experienced before. So one of the things that I was really proud of at the start of the pandemic is that I would go out into public and I wouldn't wear a mask and I would smile at people and I would try to bring a smile to all of these essential workers that were quite literally keeping our lives functioning. And there were a lot of jokes about what was and what wasn't essential at that time. And yeah, they're funny, whatever. But the reality is, if the people at the grocery store, if the employees at the grocery store decided they weren't going to come in, we lost our society. If the employees at the gas station decided they weren't going to come in, we've lost society. Like, we were that close. Right? If you imagine that there are no employees who are willing to go to a grocery store, there are no employees that were willing to go to the delivery trucks, what's going to happen? I don't think we really fully appreciated how close we were and how valuable those people were. And I think in a way I was able to see the value of those employees. One, because I felt really connected to them before the pandemic. And two, because I had this 4-month head start on thinking about these things. So I would try to go places. I'd try to go shopping, and I would, while everyone else was covered up in a mask, I would try to bring like brightness and happiness and positivity, because there were a lot of people that were interacting with other humans in a very scared and terrified way at that point, right? And I saw the fear in people, and I saw how the mask, I saw how I felt the mask was being used, right? So it's very easy. And it's very easy because a lot of people wear a mask in a false reality that it offers protection for them. Now, it may offer a very minimal, very, very minimal amount of protection for you from airborne illness. But the reality of the mask is it was providing protection from the expelled air of us individual beings. It was reducing the distance that our breath would travel into the society with which we were interacting. But I didn't see it like that at the beginning. I saw this opportunity to not wear a mask as a positive, that I could bring kind of positivity to people. As the pandemic continued on, it became more and more apparent to me that my decision to not wear a mask was not providing positivity to anyone anymore. It was providing significantly more fear, and it was providing significantly more negative and anxious feelings of the people around me. And at that point, I changed the way I interacted and started wearing a mask. As if you are an anti-mask person, let me just share this with you, right? Like, yes, it's easy to see that some people are wearing masks because they are scared of catching a virus, and there is not a lot of logic in wearing a mask in an attempt to prevent a virus from getting in your body, right? The size of the virus is infinitely smaller than the protection that the mask offers. And now I see, right, if you're looking to create a story for yourself, the story that you are likely creating for yourself is, okay, Patrick, so if the mask isn't protecting a virus from getting into me, if the virus can get through the mask, then why would I need to wear one? Again, that is a goalpost moving. Okay, so there is some grace here, because if you remember, initially the CDC recommended not for citizens to not wear masks. Now, when they did this, they were speaking to us dishonestly. Okay, so they told Americans not to wear masks because they were worried if they told us to wear masks, we would buy all of them. And then the essential workers, the workers at the hospital, the workers at the grocery store, the workers delivering all of the things we needed from Amazon, wouldn't have the option to wear a mask, right? So initially we were lied to, we were given bad information to not wear masks, and they told us it was because it wasn't effective. Okay, so if you are then on guard as to why you would then wear a mask, I can understand that logic, right? It's like, well, they told us not to. And they did a bad job. There are lots of things, right? You may or may not remember in March, in the middle of March, when they said, hey, we're going to shut down, the Trump administration came out and said it's going to be a 2-week shutdown. That was obviously never going to be true. We weren't going to solve a global pandemic in 2 weeks, but that's what they told us, right? There were lots of pieces of information that were given to us that were dishonest, that were inaccurate, and that were done to manipulate the way the populace works. That's all true. But it doesn't make the fact that masks reduce the depth that the expelled air from our body can travel a false reality. It is 100% true that putting a mask, putting anything in front of your face will prevent the air from traveling a distance that it would have traveled without that block, without that barrier in front of you. So it's just a reality that we have to live with. We sometimes are given bad information. That doesn't make all information that we're given bad. But so I understand what you're saying. You're saying if the virus can get in, then why can't the virus get out? Again, that is a goalpost moving. It is not about the virus not leaving our body. Every time, if you are infected with COVID and you exhale, there are scientific studies that show the virus leaves your body. Now, if your virus leaves your body and it travels in a 6-foot radius around you, then anyone in a 6-foot radius has that opportunity to be infected. If you're wearing a mask and that dampens the depth with which your breath is expelled to a foot, then you've reduced that capacity to infect others 6 times. And that's why masks are important. Masks are not important because they protect you. They don't. Masks are not important because they don't let the virus leave your body. They do. They just reduce the amount of spread, and that is important. So there's not a lot of logic in that. But there's also a huge subgroup of people who wear masks for the other reason, which is so that they are not spreading their breath into the public in a way that is advantageous for the people around them. And not wearing a mask is just it is sending a message, whether you are attempting to send that message or not. The message you are sending is that you don't care about the people around you. Now, I've had it brought up that people want to not wear masks so that they can show other people that it's okay to not wear masks. That's not the message you're sending. That might be the message you think you're sending, but the message you're actually sending is that you don't care about the people around you. And that is a reality of the situation. That is the message that the other people are receiving. So whatever message you're attempting to send, if you're not attempting to send the message that you don't care about the people around you, it's the message that's being received. And that's an important part here, right? So I recognized from my interactions with other humans that the message I was attempting to send was not being received, and therefore I had to change my actions so that it more accurately reflected the message that I wanted to send, which is that I appreciate you for being here. I appreciate you for being the human that you are, and I will do what makes you feel comfortable. And I will make this little tiny sacrifice of putting a piece of cotton on my face so that you can feel better. And I view that small sacrifice as very worth it to make the people around me feel better about their lives. Now, there's this other concept about, I've had somebody attempt to say that masks, the information they've seen is that masks are bad for you. Well, it's a pretty silly statement to make for a few reasons. If you are walking into a room full of poisonous gas, well, wearing a gas mask is going to be very advantageous for you. Now, if you're walking across the Mojave Desert and you don't have anything to drink, wearing a mask over your head, a gas mask over your head that increases the heat on your brain is probably not going to be a very good thing for you. So wearing a mask being bad for you or good for you is pretty dependent upon the situation that you're in. Now, if we're looking at like K95 masks, and we're like observing the potential dangers within them, the one thing we do know is there have been jobs over the last 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, where people go every day and they have to wear a mask because of the environment that they work in. And what we haven't seen is a big rash of mask deaths, right? There's not been a lot of autopsies that have come back and been like, oh, this person took a job where they wore a mask all day. Now, in your home, in an everyday environment, in a normal living experience, is your biology better designed to operate without a mask? Yeah, for sure. We didn't evolve to wear masks. But there are situations that may arise. There are situations we may choose to put ourselves in. There are situations that we may not choose to put ourselves in where wearing a mask may be advantageous for our health. And the disadvantageous situations of wearing a very thin mask that doesn't really prevent inhale or exhale respiration, but does dampen the depth at which we can send our breath, the detrimental health effects of wearing a mask like that are pretty insignificant, if any. Again, if any is probably wrong, right? I'm telling you that if you are at home, sitting on your couch, your body is better equipped to breathe without a mask on. But if you are in a place, or if you are in a place where a mask is valuable, a mask is the thing you want. What I am saying is there may be a infinitely small sacrifice to make to wear a mask over your mouth that dampens the distance at which your breath can travel when you are in a public space. Now, you may choose to not be willing to make that infinitely small sacrifice. And that is definitely a choice you can make, right? Like that is an opportunity that you have. Just remember the message that you are sending to the people around you. And again, if that's a choice you want to make, there, as we stand right now, there's not much that can be done. If that's the message you want to send other people, that's the message they'll receive. I would ask if you really think it's worth it. A lot of this comes down to this concept of freedom, and this importance of freedom, and how making this small sacrifice is like this step into this repressive society where we are subjected to these ruling figures. And I think, there's a lot of reason to be on guard about that. I do always wonder where all of this outrage was after 9/11, when TSA became a part of our lives, right? There is no documentation that TSA has made any of our lives safer. It's billions and billions of dollar expenditure a year. It makes traveling significantly worse. And when it was put in place, nobody fought against it. And to this day, we have the ability to stop TSA. One of the things that I do when I go to the airport is I don't go through your little X-ray machine, right? Like, it's wonderful that George Bush got his friend this no bid contract to provide X-ray machines for the US government. But I don't go through them. And if every single one of us decided one day we weren't going to go through them, those things would be gone the next day. We could end TSA because we could disrupt travel by just saying, no, we're not doing this, right? Like, you have no reason to scan my body. You want to run me through a little metal detector. You want to set that metal detector so it goes off when the smallest piece of metal makes it through, fine. But you have no reason to scan my body. And that outrage wasn't there. And that is a freedom that doesn't offer us any benefits. And maybe it does make some people feel safer. Maybe the illusion of introspection or inspection makes people feel safer. But if you look at the amount of dangerous items that make it through when TSA runs its own self-tests, you will see very quickly this is an ineffective program that has never once been effective and is not stopping or protecting, is not stopping anything and is not protecting us. So if you want to talk about, I've been railing on that for 20 years now, but it's not changing. And me not taking my shoes off every time I go through TSA isn't gonna make a difference, but I'm gonna keep doing it because I want to do the things that I think are valuable. And if you want to join me, you can not take your shoes off when you go to TSA. They can ask you to, and you can say, no, I am medically deciding not to take my shoes off. And then they'll ask you why, and you just, I don't talk about my own medical history with people that aren't my doctor. And I think you can make that argument, right? Like, if you want to talk about places where fungus, bacteria are transferred, think about the places where thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of feet that have been sweating in shoes get pulled off and slopped down onto the floor, right? Like, that is not a great place for human health. And I think you can be really honest about the fact that you might not want to be in that place. And I'm not a person who's a germaphobe, but I am telling you that is a place that is not cleaned, right? Like, have you ever been in one of those places and seen them cleaning the floor? No, I'm sure they clean the floor at some point, but have you ever seen it? And how many people have you seen take off their sweaty shoes and plop their sweaty feet right down on the floor? Right? Athlete's foot is a thing because sweaty feet are perfect breeding grounds for bacteria, for fungus. And that fungal expression will happen in those places. Again, this is just a small example of something that I view as a significantly bigger sacrifice than strapping a little piece of cotton to my mouth when I'm around people. And so I want to continue this, really the same story into COVID vaccines, right? The most controversial topic that exists. So I started out not interested in getting vaccinated. Let's say that. I wasn't necessarily not interested because I'm anti-vaccination. Was vaccinated as a child. I live very rurally. I don't interact with a lot of people. I didn't have a fear of COVID. there just wasn't a real good reason for me to be vaccinated in my mind, right? My perspective just didn't give me a lot of incentive. So how did I shift? Why did I shift? It's very similar to the mask idea. It came about a little bit different. It took a little bit more internalization to shift me. And really, it came from reading anti-vax social media posts. Why would reading anti-vax social media posts? See, Patrick, you are influenced by peer pressure. You just wanted to be rebellious, and that's. I mean, I do like to be a rebel, but that is not the case here. This actually came from a very logical introspection. So I read a post from someone very important to me saying that they were worried about the vaccine because it didn't have FDA approval. And that's a super easy thing to put in your head. Now I understand the Pfizer vaccination has FDA approval at this point, but we're talking about a retrospective few month ago history. So just let that concept slide. There was a point when none of the vaccines had FDA approval, and this was at that point. And I kind of being not interested in getting vaccination, that was an easy thing for me to think about as a perfect excuse, right? It's like, if this thing isn't tested, we don't know the long-term implications of COVID vaccination, which is true. We don't know the long-term implications of mRNA vaccinations in general, and that is also true. We also don't know the long-term implications of getting COVID, which is also true. But the FDA approval thing, it hasn't been tested. That's a pretty good one. So I started to think about that, like how does that actually fit into me, into my ideology? Why am I not getting this? Is it because it's not tested? Is it because it's not proven? Is it because it's dangerous? And that had me think about, what are the other things? What are the other things I've taken a risk on? Now, some of I got super sick as like a 24-year-old, and doctors couldn't help me, medical science couldn't help me. So I have taken a lot of very experimental things, and from that point, I have been pretty freed to experiment with my body. In my fridge right now, I have a research peptide that has been shown in non-human trials to lengthen telomeres, to increase telomere length. And increase in telomere length theoretically increases the lifespan of a being, of a human. And I will inject that into myself. And that has never been tested on a human. Ever. N of 1 experimentation, right? I've talked about that before. I've talked about that with some of the doctors that have been on the podcast. N of 1 experimentation is something that I am willing to do. So I was willing to inject something into my body that has no human experimentation. But I wasn't willing to get this vaccination. And I had to really think about that. Why would that be? And the reality is because research peptides, the peptides are essentially just the specific chain of amino acids that change the way that your genes express themselves. Research peptides are, they provide a direct benefit for me, an easy benefit that I can see, and maybe they do, right? But maybe they don't. We also don't know what they actually do. But I'm willing to take the risk that utilizing a research peptide could have positive implications for me personally. And once I realized that, right, once I realized I'm willing to take a risk if I can see a direct benefit for me, then it became a very easy thing to take a risk, quote unquote, of getting vaccinated, because it offers a benefit for people who may be less fortunate than me, right? Like COVID is taking a significantly higher toll on those with less financial resources and those with more age, less time. So, that became super easy to get vaccinated because I'm already willing to do these things. And then you start looking into vaccinations more. 5 billion, over 5 billion people, about 5.25 billion people have received a vaccination. And, we're just, I said that correctly, over 5 billion people on the planet have received a vaccination. And are there, are there potential long-term implications? Yeah, I mean, there's potential long-term implications for everything, but the side effects, the demonstrable side effects are so minimal. Have there been people who have become ill because of the vaccination? 5 billion people have taken the vaccination, and yes, there have been. But like, if the vaccine for COVID somehow turned out to be milk, 38% of the American population would have a negative reaction to milk. 38% of the American population is lactose intolerant. There have been essentially infantilely small serious implications with 5 billion people receiving a vaccination. So the has this been tested theory, we're not talking about an N of 1. We're talking about an N of 5.25 billion. 5.25 billion. N of 5.25 billion. There are no studies with N of 5.25 billion. Like N of 5.25 billion is as certain as we will ever get with any study ever. And that has already happened, and we already have that data. And there just aren't verifiable real problems that are happening with this real-time study that is happening on the human population. And yes, I do understand that there is a sacrifice, that you may be taking an infantilely small risk in getting vaccinated. That's true. There's no argument about that. We do not know the long-term implications. And again, we also do not know the long-term implications of getting COVID. But we do know that there's a real risk, and the risk is expanding. As the virus mutates in new ways, it is becoming more powerful. And the thing I said from the beginning, which is if we dodge this one, there'll be another one, is coming more and more true. Now, I think that it's easy to move the goalposts on the vaccination conversation. It's hard to look at yourself and be like, is this minor inconvenience? Is this minor risk? Is this minor invasion, taking a shot in the arm, worth it for me? Even though I don't have a fear of COVID, right? I don't feel worried about this virus, and I don't feel that there's a reason for me to do this. Well, again, there may not, you may be able to handle COVID. You may be a super healthy, amazing being, and genetically you may be able to deal with whatever virus comes your way. But there are people that aren't so lucky to be you. And if we get the vaccination done, we eradicate the virus in the same way that we can look down at our arm and we don't see a smallpox scar anymore. Now, there's a scar that happened when you got a smallpox vaccination that was there. And we don't have that because we eradicated smallpox, because we don't have to get the smallpox vaccination anymore because we got rid of it. And all we have to do is look down at our arm and see, oh, I don't have a smallpox scar. So yes, there is a sacrifice, but I don't think, two things, if you're willing to make a sacrifice because you view it as a benefit for you, but you're not willing to make a sacrifice because it is a benefit for society, that may be who you are. And I don't really think there's anything that anyone can do to make you not be that person. Like, you could not be that person. Like, you could be a better person. That's just kind of reality. And when we start, you can make up, you can move the thing, right? You can say, oh, now there's ivermectin, right? Like, we could use a different drug to treat COVID. Sure. I mean, we don't really know the long-term implications of using a horse dewormer on our body either, though. So it's not like we're no longer, it's not FDA approved. We're no longer, we've kind of moved the post to now there's a different thing. I mean, maybe there is a different thing. Maybe you could treat COVID with a different thing. But also we could get vaccinated and just eradicate the thing, and then we don't have to wear masks anymore. We could refigure out society in a way that isn't as disease kind of culturing. And if you want to say, there's still people that talk about COVID being a hoax, and it's not. I think it's really like just a quick Google search of proponents of anti-vaccination who have paid the ultimate price of dying by COVID brings up a pretty good list, right? Like Mark Brenner, who was a conservative right-wing talk show host in Florida, called himself Mr. Anti-Vax. Well, he just died. He was non-vaccinated. He just died of COVID. Phil Valentine, a conservative talk show host, died on August 21st of COVID, was not vaccinated, spent a lot of time expressing his skepticism of the vaccination. Dick Farrell, a conservative talk show host from Florida, was a Trump supporter who changed his mind about the vaccine after he got sick, after it was too late, and he died on August 4th after a 2-week battle with COVID. Todd Tucker, conservative talk show host from Oklahoma City, died on August 11th. Had viral pneumonia that came about from a COVID-19 experience. Dr. Jimmy DeYoung Sr., a radio host and Bible prophecy teacher. He died on August 15th, and he had spoken about how the vaccine was all about government control. Another public defender, anti-vaccination, who died of COVID. Caleb Wallace, the founder of the San Anglo Freedom Defenders, an anti-mask group who organized anti-mask rallies. He died August 28th and had been unconscious and on a ventilator for weeks before he died. Herman Cain, right? Republican politician, part of the Tea Party, an active Trump supporter who didn't really even live long enough to get the opportunity to become an anti-vaxxer because he died in July of 2020 of COVID-19. And this list will go on and on and on, right? And there is no reason for any of us to believe that all of these people who spend all of their energy talking about how dangerous the vaccine is, who then die of the disease that the vaccine would have protected them from, have any reason to be dishonest about their vaccination status. You know, Donald Trump got the vaccine in January at the White House. You know, it's hard for me to understand how you couldn't see that there may be a benefit for you individually. But even if you don't see that there are definitely people dying of COVID who wouldn't be dying of COVID if we had all been vaccinated. If we had taken the steps to eradicate this virus while we have the opportunity. And yeah, are there worries about an authoritarian government? Yeah, for sure. But this is a disease, right? This is an illness, a virus. This isn't the red party versus the blue party. This is a viral entity against the human biology. And if you've made this a political thing, if you've determined which side of your vaccination status you're on based upon what economic policies you believe in, does that make any sense? Does it make any sense to be so concerned about your individual freedoms that you show up as the a-hole in the community? And now keep in mind, I started this by saying, I'm not concerned about what the community thinks of me. And that's still true. This isn't, oh, I'm gonna do this because the community thinks I should. This is, I think I should do this because it offers a benefit to the community with which I exist upon. And I don't exist if our community doesn't exist, right? If the workers at the grocery store, if the workers in the shipping departments, if these people decide they're not interested, I don't exist. And you don't exist either. Because if society breaks down, or if we get so sick as a society that we can't function optimally, none of us, and that includes those of you who might have basements full of canned goods, are going to survive this thing. And it's not going to be a lot of fun. You're going to have all the freedom you've ever wanted if government breaks down, if there is no more society. But you're going to wish you had one. Because society is the thing that keeps us safe. Society is the thing that keeps us together. And society is the thing that keeps us alive. And if you've lost the value of your social experience to your individual freedoms, I think your priorities have misaligned. And again, I understand the individual freedoms, right? I'm telling you, I protest TSA every time I fly. I have spent an hour in front of police officers. I have been pulled into back rooms. I have missed flights. So I understand personal freedom. I understand standing up for it. But if you pick the personal freedom that doesn't really ring true intellectually to who you are you willing to experiment with other things in your life because they provide direct benefit for you? Are you willing to take an experimental supplement that helps you lose weight? Are you willing to take an experimental supplement that helps you put on muscle or makes your brain work better? But you're not willing to take a vaccine that 5.25 billion people have received without issue, because you're worried about what it might do to you, or because you don't see the direct benefit for you. So what I'm trying to tell you is, no matter what side you're on here, there is a direct benefit for you to get vaccinated. And the direct benefit is that you protect the community around you, that you make people around you feel better, that you make the people around you safer. When the people around you feel better, feel safer, and are safer, they're nicer, they're kinder. When people are nicer and kinder, your life is immeasurably improved. And it's like, you know, I get in these one-on-one podcasts and it feels very preachy, and it's not what I'm doing. What I'm offering here is a document of someone who was both anti-mask and anti-vax, and who took a conscious path of self-observation about what the reality of the situation was, and who had to shift my perspective, right? It wasn't I wanted to shift my perspective. I had to shift my perspective because the facts of the situation forced me, if I wanted to be intellectually honest with myself, the facts of the situation forced me to change my perspective. So as you sit and you think about, you know, what choices you've made and how those choices impact your community, your world, can you allow yourself the opportunity to expand your perspective 1%? If you see a red card in front of you, can you start to see the edge of the card? Can you start to see the 1% of the other side? If you see a green card in front of you, can you allow yourself to see that 1% of the other side? And by seeing that 1% of the other perspective, right? The reason I'm sharing these things is I had both sides. I saw the red and the green side of both of these two issues. And I changed not because of the pressure of society, not because I was scared of anything, but because it was the right, honest thing to do. So can you take, and if again, right, if you are on a, I was the first one to be vaccinated person, and, you know, I took this risk, and you know, it's wonderful. But you need to see the other 1% of the side too, right? You need to understand that there are people who aren't viewing, that are viewing the mask thing not as they're viewing wearing a mask as a selfish thing. Because some people do wear masks because they're scared, and that like selfish thing of being scared, it doesn't have a logical conclusion, because masks aren't protecting you, they're protecting others. But if you're on the side of, you know, we don't wear masks, you have to realize that some people are wearing masks not because they're scared, but because they are aware and wanting to protect their community. Or maybe it's not even protect, maybe it's just comfort. You know, offering comfort to your neighbors, offering comfort to your community is a pretty rad thing to do. So for both of these perspectives that are constantly pulling each other apart, no matter which side you fall on, what would happen to your view if you expanded 1%, right? If you think the vaccination is the most important thing, Can you expand your perspective to see that some people are worried about long-term implications? That's fine, right? I mean, the reality is, if you've been vaccinated, we don't know the long-term implications. The reality is, if you haven't been vaccinated and you get COVID, or you've had COVID, you don't know the long-term implications. We're in a new space. But to pretend that either side is equally right also isn't fair. There is a reality that 5.2 billion people have received the vaccination, and that there just haven't been issues. Could there someday be issues? Yes, but there could be issues with anything. We could find out. I talked about COVID earlier, right? We could find out in 30 years that, or sorry, excuse me, I talked about keto earlier. I did talk about COVID too. I talked about keto earlier. We could find out in 30 years that if you ever went on a keto diet, you like took off 30 years of your life. Now, biologically, historically, evolution, humans have experienced ketosis forever. So the likelihood of that happening is infinitely small. But sure, anything could happen. And there have never been long-term implications from any vaccine. And sure, there have never been after, I think, 30 days, there have never been new complications that have emerged in a significant way from any vaccine after someone's been vaccinated for 30 days. So, but could there be? Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's an infinitely small risk that anything could happen. Again, if the cure for COVID was in almonds, if people who are deathly allergic to nuts, the COVID vaccination was made from almonds, it would kill all of those people, right? So there are infinitely small risks in everything. And using infinitely small risks or shifting the goalpost as your ideas get pushed away just isn't an intellectually honest way of reviewing the current situation we're in. So if you have a desire to end the pandemic, if you have a desire to go back to a quote unquote normal way of living where we don't have to have a mask in the car at all times, there's some really easy things we can do. And we might have to do them for another 12 months, right? But it's better than 72 months. It's better than 96 months, or it's better than 100. Like, let's make a small sacrifice now so we stop having to make sacrifices in the future. Take a look at your life. See if you've given yourself the opportunity to ingest things or inject things. I'm sure there are fewer injections than ingestions. Things that might be a little bit experimental. But you took them, you were willing to take that risk because it directly benefited you. And see if you can apply that same thing, whether it be wearing a mask or getting a vaccination, to the protection or the benefit of the community. So this podcast is the opening of a dialogue. And I am more than happy to hear from you about your questions, about your comments, about your thoughts on these topics. The only thing that I'll ever ask is that you come with the same open ear that I'll give you and an intellectually honest perspective that isn't willing to move the goalposts and is rooted in the middle ground and the middle space that is the independent reality that exists beyond our own perspective. I'll talk to you guys soon.